Good afternoon. It's Thursday, the 13th of April 2017, just after 1 o'clock. Welcome to UK Column News. I'm your host, Brian Gerrish, with me in the studio, Mike Robinson. And where do we start? It better be world politics as we see the dangerous situation in the Middle East intensify.
Well, we're going to start actually with Beslan School, the school siege. Now, just to remind everybody, the Beslan school siege that began on the 1st of September 2004, it lasted for 3 days. It involved the holding hostage of 1,000 or approaching 1,100 people, including 700 or so children, and it ended up with the deaths of 385 people. And of course, this was Chechen rebels, as they were called, a group of armed Islamic rebels occupying a school in the town of Beslan, which is in North Ossetia. And they were demanding recognition for the independence of Chechnya. They wanted Russia to withdraw from Chechnya. And on the third day of the standoff, the Russian security forces stormed the building with, as the mainstream media would have us believe, with the use of tanks, incendiary rockets, other heavy weapons. So the Russians took some criticism for the way that they dealt with this. This was eventually brought to the European Court of Human Rights, and the European Court of Human Rights has now ruled that Russia failed to protect the hostages in the school siege in 2004. They say that officials knew that an attack was imminent, but they didn't act. So that's kind of the ruling. The ruling also includes, I think, a €3 million compensation package for the victims and so on. Well, thanks to Alex Thompson for some insight here and some reminders. What he noted was that in the media coverage of this, first of all, they don't actually name the court case, so it is Tagayeva and others versus Russia. If anybody wants to look it up, he makes the point that they could have done more to prevent the thing. The wording is a total twisting of the case. And he's also noting the spread of nationalities of the judges. So we've got judges from Monaco, from the former Yugoslav Republic of Macedonia. We've got somebody from Estonia, somebody from Greece, Norway, Croatia, one from Russia, Australia, and Azerbaijan. But quite a sort of move to the anti-Russian side there. Alex saying that the bungled storming charge is particularly sick. He makes the point that the terrorists were letting off grenades at the moment when police had to punch a hole through the gym wall. There was also intelligence coming out and plenty of physical evidence left behind that the hostage takers were raping young and preteen girls. Now, as I say, in the ruling, the court said that Russia had specific information that an attack was being planned and that they did not act. And Alex's point is that, of course, the reason why Russia had little or no prior intelligence was that the terrorists were Georgian/Turkish/NATO CIA-trained Gladio B operatives. That's how he's describing it. I agree with that absolutely. One of the immediate consequences of the massacre was that the ethnic Ingush, same ethnicity as Chechens in the easternmost county of North Ossetia, who moved there in the late Stalinist era, were ostracized and worse by the Ossetians who had suffered. So that caused internal strife within the North Ossetian region as well. It's also said that powerful weapons such as tank, cannon, grenade launchers and flamethrowers have been used to free the school, contributing to the large number of casualties. So that's pretty much where we are at the minute. That looks like a pretty political decision more than anything else, Brian.
Yeah, well, I think it's just become sickening, Mike, to see that apparently Russia can do no good. It doesn't matter what the Russians do. The West suffers at the hands of terrorists, but of course Russia doesn't have a terrorism problem. We don't call them terrorists there. They're all freedom fighters as far as the West is concerned. And I think the timing of this is pretty interesting. This has been released at this moment when, of course, Russia's under the spotlight, supposedly for events in Syria.
Well,
it's,
yeah,
yeah, I think it's highly manipulated action by the West.
well, absolutely. So straight after this program, if you're watching the UK Column live stream, we're going to show the episode of Insight where with Patrick and I were speaking to Alex Thompson and also to Eric Zeus about this region, and the Beslan school siege was one of the topics mentioned and discussed. So stay on the live stream after this program if you want to watch that. Now, Donald Trump was hosting Jens Stoltenberg yesterday. We mentioned this on yesterday's news. The press release and so on, and the various video footage is out. So let's just have a look at a little part of the press statement that Trump made.
It's a pleasure to welcome you to the White House, especially at such an important moment in our great alliance. We are grateful for the support of NATO members and partners in their condemnation of Assad's murderous attack using the most horrible weapons. The vicious slaughter of innocent civilians with chemical weapons, including the barbaric killing of small and helpless children and babies, must be forcefully rejected by any nation that values human life. It is time to end this brutal civil war, defeat terrorists, and allow refugees to return home. In facing our common challenges, we must also ensure that NATO members meet their financial obligations and pay what they owe. Many have not been doing that. The Secretary General and I agree that other member nations must satisfy their responsibility to contribute 2% of GDP to defense. If other countries pay their fair share instead of relying on the United States to make up the difference, we will all be much more secure, and our partnership will be made that much stronger. The Secretary General and I had a productive discussion about what more NATO can do in the fight against terrorism. I complained about that a long time ago, and they made a change, and now they do fight terrorism. I said it was obsolete. It's no longer obsolete.
So, Brian, another U-turn from Donald Trump, because just a week or two ago, NATO was obsolete. Now it's no longer obsolete.
It's phenomenal, isn't it? Many people in the UK column chat box have picked up on this and saying, what an astonishing U-turn of this man. What's been done to him? I wonder, was he false from the start? That's a possibility. Or did he come in with the right intentions? Somebody's whispered in his ear. These advisors have just got too close to him. Or has he had his family threatened or something? There's a number of possibilities, but the U-turn is 180 degrees.
And pretty incredible. Jens Stoltenberg himself really didn't have anything new to say. One of the main features of this was the idea that NATO members are not contributing enough cash to NATO, and the UK government insisting that it is spending 2% of its GDP on defence, but some other European countries in particular are not. So clearly Trump is getting on board with Stoltenberg to try to put some pressure on other countries to start spending more and take a bit of the load away from the United States. Stoltenberg said that he welcomed a very strong commitment of the United States to the security of Europe, and it was demonstrated in words but also in deeds, and he was very pleased at the number of US troops on the ground, particularly in Eastern Europe at the moment.
Well, this comes back to how it's always been, Mike, that of course during the Cold War era, the reliance was always on American troops on the ground. It was American troops, it was American equipment, it was American resupply facilities from the American industrial complex, was always the driving force. And of course, nothing has changed. And Trump isn't going to get value through NATO from Europe because the bulk of the European countries want to support the European Union and an integrated, unified EU defence force. So NATO, as far as Europe's concerned, is something on the sidelines. And of course, France has been one of the lead drivers of this, because France has never wanted to properly engage with NATO because they don't like the fact that America calls the shots, not France.
Well, maybe that will change once the EU military establishment is established properly, and the EU becomes the partner with NATO rather than individual
That's absolutely
members.
correct. And I hope after the weekend we'll have Dave Ellis joining us to talk about some of these developments with the EU unified defence forces.
Well, also in that little statement to the press, Donald Trump made a comment about Rex Tillerson's visit to Russia. So let's just have a listen to what he said there.
I also want to acknowledge the great work being done by our Secretary of State, Rex Tillerson, to strengthen the NATO alliance, as well as the Secretary's trip to Moscow to promote the security interests of the United States and its allies. He did a terrific job. Just watch parts of it. He did an absolutely terrific job.
So Tillerson doing a fantastic job in Russia, according to Trump, but only if you watch parts of what he did. So apparently he wasn't doing such a great job in other parts. I'm not sure, but it was very interesting. I just thought it was a very interesting little statement that go and watch what he did. In parts, he was doing a very good job. So I'm not quite sure where Trump stood there.
I think that's known as faint praise, Mike, is the term that covers that.
Possibly, but all through the mainstream media, Russia's Lavrov dominated the news conference with Tillerson. Tillerson being put down. Donald Trump says U.S.-Russia relations have released a low point, but reverses position on NATO. But the key point here is U.S.-Russia relations have reached a low point. What's this? The New York Times at meeting, Putin and Tillerson find very little to agree on. So, well, the truth is there may be a little bit more to this than meets the eye. What did Tillerson actually say? Well, he said that in the press conference afterwards, basically he acknowledged that relations with Russia are not so good, but we need to attempt to put an end to this steady degradation. So he's basically saying, we've got to stop this and be a bit more sensible about things. Lavrov himself, who was dominating everything apparently, we understand each other better after today's talks. He also agreed that basically there's a lot of stupidity going on here. He said that the US and Moscow are not worlds apart on many key issues. He emphasized that we need to learn the lessons of the past, otherwise we cannot be successful in the present. And he, of course, recounted the history of NATO interventions in Yugoslavia, in Libya, and Sudan and South Sudan. We'll be coming on to South Sudan in a minute. And he said, we've seen this all before. So, that the message here wasn't as negative as the mainstream media was portraying it. Quite the opposite, a recognition by both that, there's got to be a bit more sense here.
Yeah, but that was the, that was the dialogue with the Americans, of course.
Yeah, yes, indeed. And in the meantime, Putin gave this interview with Mir just before the Tillerson meeting, and also before he was heading off to Kyrgyzstan for an official visit. And he said that U.S.-Russia relations had probably worsened, possibly to a point even worse than under Obama. He said, we all witnessed the recent U.S. airstrikes against Syria. How did the American NATO allies react? They all nodded away in docile agreement without even bothering to analyse what was actually happening. Where is the proof that the Syrian government forces used chemical weapons? There is no proof. However, there has been a violation of international law. This is clear and evident fact. An airstrike has been carried out against a sovereign state without the UN Security Council's approval. But despite this flagrant violation of international law, they all just nod their agreement and give their support. The same thing happened back in 2003 when a pretext was concocted to justify sending troops to Iraq. The country was destroyed as a result. And it was after this that we saw rapid emergence of various terrorist organizations and groups, the emergence of ISIS and other organizations. Everyone knows this. But here they go, making the same mistakes again. So Putin absolutely and Lavrov absolutely on the same page as to how the US needs to react at this point, what they need to do, and sort of warning that they're making the same mistakes that they've made in the past.
Because it's the same plan in operation.
Right, and let's just get straight onto the United Nations Security Council yesterday, because there was a draft resolution put in, and the fireworks at this were pretty incredible, Brian. So yet another anti-Syria draft resolution by the UK, France and the USA. Now, the way that the UN have described this, I'll just read it out, because they say that the Security Council rejected a draft resolution that would have condemned the reported chemical weapons attack on the Syrian town of Khan Shaykhun, and expressed its determination to hold the perpetrators accountable. Defeated by 10 votes in favour and 2 against, that was Bolivia and Russia, with 3 abstentions, China, Ethiopia, and Kazakhstan. The draft would have emphasised Syria's obligation to comply with the recommendations of the Organisation of Prohibition on Chemical Weapons, fact-finding mission and the OPCW United Nations Joint Investigative Mechanism by providing immediate and unfettered access to and the right to inspect any and all sites. Well, we'll come on to that specific point in a moment, but following the result, a number of countries decided to make comments, and the most obscene was, without question, Matthew Rycroft, as usual, because he just was being pretty indescribable in the use of his language. He absolutely, as usual, vitriolic self. He accused Russia of all kinds of nastiness, including that they directly support the use of chemical weapons in Syria. He said, despite the efforts of the Council and the international community, the people of Syria have been denied a political solution for more than 6 years. They have suffered over 6 years of ever-increasing, ever-escalating barbarity, over 6 years of failed ceasefires and false dawns. The Council has been held to ransom for those 6 years by Russia's shameless support of the Assad regime. Support with the regime is flaunting. Chemical weapons scientists at Porton Down in the United Kingdom have analysed samples obtained from the recent attack and they have tested positive for the nerve agent sarin, he said, or sarin-like substance. The United Kingdom therefore shares the US assessment that it is highly likely that the regime was responsible for a sarin attack on the 4th of April. So once again, highly likely. It's not definitive, just highly likely. And yet we are still here in this chamber with the regime showing no interest in peace, encouraged by Russia's support in this council to keep dropping bombs, to keep using chemical weapons. Time and again, Russia has abused its veto to protect the regime and to defend its use of chemical weapons. And what has Russia got in return for 7 vetoes in 6 years? Let me tell you, Russia's initiative in 2013 to dismantle Syria's chemical weapons has been exposed as a shambles. Russian pride in the Astana process has been turned into humiliation, and Russia's credibility and reputation across the world has been poisoned by its toxic association with Assad. They have chosen to side with a murderous, barbaric criminal rather than with their international peers. They have chosen the wrong side of history. However, it's not too late for Russia to change course. It's not too late for Russia to fulfill its responsibilities as a permanent member of this Security Council.
This sounds like rhetoric coming out of North Korea, Mike. It's over the top, it's outrageous, it's untrue, it's twisted.
Well, and I would go as far as to say Matthew Rycroft is pretty twisted in the fact that he can deliver this without a smile on his face, because he clearly takes what he's saying seriously.
No shame, no morals, no real value to him. But to say it's sarin, they keep coming back to its sarin. This, of course, is the centre of the lie. It cannot possibly have been sarin.
No, well,
because of this whole business of how the casualties were handled, it cannot have been sarin. And if it wasn't sarin, then we have to start asking the questions: what was it? If it's organophosphate type chemicals, then where did they come from? Who was using them? And of course, at the moment, the Western media, led by the BBC mainly, simply doesn't want to answer this question. So he was spinning the lie, wasn't he?
Absolutely. Now, the Russian Deputy Permanent Representative to the UN Security Council is Vladimir Safronkov. Now, I apologise if there's a spelling mistake on this. This is the autocorrect feature on Keynote, which has decided to change UN Security Council to unseen, but there you go, UNSC. So he was visibly angry in his response to Matthew Rycroft. He said that the UK and the US are taking the view of, guilt over innocence, so guilty until proven innocent. This goes against all international legal norms. He made the point that the Russian veto was not because they disagreed in principle. It was because of that specific point that the UK and the US are taking the view of guilt, until proven innocent, and that this goes against international norms, and that they're blocking any attempt to bring about an independent investigation. So the United Nations claiming that part of this resolution would have provided immediate and unfettered access to and the right to inspect any and all areas. But his point, Safronkov's point, is that the proposal, in fact, was to carry out a remote investigation, that nobody would have appeared on the ground, and he's saying this was unacceptable, and that's why they vetoed it. If it had been, he's saying that the investigation has to be on the ground, they have to be there, they have to see what actually happened, where it happened, and carry out their investigation in Syria.
That is a normal investigation in my book, Mike. Is if you have an incident, where do you start investigating where the incident took place?
Right. In terms of Matthew Rycroft himself, Vladimir Safronkov said his address shows only that he intends to hamper de Mistura's efforts to resolve the crisis in Syria and to bring confrontation and enmity to this council. He said, "You lose sleep over the fact that we might work together with the United States. You're scared and you'll do anything to undermine it." And he said, the essence is, and everyone knows very well, that you're afraid. Cooperating with the United States is what you fear. You're doing everything to make make sure this kind of cooperation is undermined. And that's precisely why. And then he said, "Look at me, I'm speaking to you, don't look away. Why are you looking away? This is precisely what why you to date didn't say anything about the political process, didn't even listen to de Mistura's briefing on purpose. What have you done to advance a ceasefire? The UK does nothing to achieve a political solution in Syria. On the contrary, you invite illegal armed groups to London, groups that murder Christians and others in the Middle East. You advance their interests. Regime change is more important to you." He was angry, but frankly, the points that he made were all, as you say, correct, measured, and he's just calling for a proper investigation.
I think the Russians are coming across so well at the moment for a very simple fact, and that is that they are telling the truth. They know they're telling the truth, and therefore it's very easy for them to actually speak publicly. We're seeing this with Putin. He comes across very calm, very measured. His foreign staff are able to do the same thing. This is because they are not inventing a story. They're going down a set piece. Whereas we've got the British government, we see this on home policy as well. Doesn't matter what we're talking about, whether it's jobs or transport or industry, spin, lies, propaganda. And we're going to show a bit more of this in a moment.
Another nail in the narrative for the West, because this is Theodore A. Postel, who's Professor Emeritus of Science, Technology and National Security Policy at the Massachusetts Institute of Technology. And he yesterday released a 14-page document refuting the 4-page so-called dossier issued by the White House. He said, "I've reviewed the document carefully. I believe it can be shown without doubt that the document does not provide any evidence whatsoever that the US government has concrete knowledge that the government of Syria was the source of the chemical attack." He said that the evidence that is available suggests that the attack was executed by individuals on the ground and not from aircraft. He said, "The only indisputable fact stated in the White House report is the claim that a chemical attack using nerve gas occurred, although the White House statement repeats this point in many places within its report. The report contains absolutely no evidence that the attack was the result of ammunition being dropped from an aircraft. In fact, the report contains absolutely no evidence that would indicate who was the perpetrator of the atrocity. So that's pretty unfortunate for the United States and for Great Britain.
Unfortunate or good for them, Mike, because it's only if people start really going for the truth and picking up these errors that we're going to get somewhere. And on that very subject, let's bring in this organisation. Now, we've covered Full Fact before, but it's time to get back to them because, of course, this interesting little so-called charity says it's there to now root out fake news and check the facts as to what's happening. So I thought this morning it'd be a good place to go to see what they said about the gas attack in Syria. So I put in Idlib gas attack. I got nothing. I also put in sarin and I got nothing. In fact, I got nothing at all about what's actually happening in the with regard to this incident in Syria. So it doesn't matter what you put in, but what you could find is a report about the attacks in 2013. So this is the Full Fact page, and here it's saying on the 21st of August 2013, reports emerged of an alleged chemical weapons attack on the outskirts of Damascus. Now, we had a little look at what was being said here. This one caught my eye. US Secretary of State John Kerry blamed the Syrian government for the attack. And there's Full Fact has put in, obviously, a web link. And I thought, well, I'm going to click this and see some substance. Where do you think this might have gone, Mike? Well, let's bring it in. Here we are, because it went to a BBC report, which was reporting John Kerry. So this is hearsay on maybe, might, could. So we've got exactly the same thing going on here, except it's worse now, because we've got Full Fact claiming that it's one of the bodies standing up for accuracy in reporting. And then down here, it says that a report that's been presented by the French Prime Minister stated that the use of chemical weapons could not have been ordered and carried out by anyone but the Syrian government. So that was a pretty critical report. But of course, you'll notice that, well, there's nothing there. So you're led into a complete hole. The BBC is quoted because John Kerry is there blaming the Russians. But we go into this organisation and it takes you really round in a circle so that ultimately Assad is blamed.
But basically, we've got an organisation calling itself Full Fact that produces reports which don't have any facts.
This is really the nub of it. Yeah. But actually, it's a bit deeper than that, Mike, and we've got a couple of intervening slides, and then we'll be back on the subject. This one came through last night, and I thought we'd bring it on. There's a YouTube video of this man, Sean Spicer, the White House press secretary, speaking. And if you go and have a look at this clip, it's quite incredible, because he says the goal for the United States is to make sure we destabilize Syria. And then there's a sort of pause, and you can see him almost destabilize the conflict, is what he then says, reduce the threat of ISIS. So I think this was a major Freudian slip by this man. He was talking about what the real policy is, which is to destabilize Syria. But if we say, well, the policy is to destabilize the conflict, let's just think this through. If we say the goal is for the US to make sure it destabilizes Syria, this makes sense, because destabilization is going to help destabilize Syria, makes it more difficult for Assad, and that promotes regime change.
It actually does a little bit more than that, because we believe what's coming is the full balkanization of Syria into separate regions.
Yep.
And the regionalization. So that will absolutely support that.
Yeah,
policy.
And that's what came out of this man's head, out of his mouth, and then you saw this double take. He realised what he said, so then he changed it to destabilise the conflict there, reduce the threat of ISIS. But if you destabilise a conflict, you make it more chaotic, and therefore you're going to make it, in a military sense, even more difficult to do anything. So I think this man let slip in front of all the cameras what the real policy is. It's never changed, it's regime change. And of course, we remember that Daily Mail report back in 2015 saying that emails that had been leaked showed there was a US plan to allow the terrorists to carry out a gas attack, which could then be blamed on Assad. An amazing coincidence.
Yep. And then obviously other things going on in the region. In Yemen, the war continues, but this is an interesting development because this is 55 members of the House of Representatives have sent a bipartisan letter to Trump and to Attorney General Jeff Sessions, and they require that the president seeks authorization from Congress before any military escalation in Yemen. So basically, this is to forestall any possibility that Trump would attempt to do another U-turn and support Saudi Arabia in Yemen, and they worry that the situation in Yemen could degrade into a full-blown famine. And the letter says it's a first step in reasserting our constitutional check on presidential powers. They're committed to pursuing all tools at their disposal to ensure President Trump abides by our Constitution before possibly plunging the country into another senseless conflict. At the end of the day, of course, while that's laudable, they should perhaps be putting increasing pressure on Saudi Arabia to get them to stop blowing that country apart in the first place.
Correct, but we also remember what we were reporting yesterday, which was reports that were coming through Stratfor and Riva Goujon saying that basically the power of Saudi Arabia was to decline. So it's going to be interesting to watch what route they're going to go to help support Saudi, or they're actually going to go for this total destabilization of the Middle East.
Absolutely. And in the meantime, in South Sudan, Priti Patel has been commenting on this. She was particularly concerned that the situation in South Sudan is tribal. It's absolutely tribal. It's genocide. So she's talking about genocide in South Sudan. And of course, people are going to be suffering massive famine in South Sudan. The alleged civil war erupted in South Sudan in 2013. Well, I would just make the point that, of course, Priti Patel talking about all the millions of pounds, continuing to talk about the millions of pounds that we're pumping in to South Sudan and the region. Well, this has been going on for a very long time. So I was just looking at some of the figures from some of the historic figures and how much money the British government has been pumping into this region. So between 2004 2007, £326 million went into Sudan, another £115 million in 2008, and it's been the same almost every year since then. And Brian, I'm just going to say again, how does Priti Patel stand with and speak to people with a straight face and say that there's this massive crisis coming and we've got to keep pumping British aid money into Sudan? When we've been pumping British aid money into Sudan for decades, we have created this problem in the first place. That's what our British aid money has gone to do, to create this problem, to foment a civil war there and split the country apart. So British policy absolutely being pushed through by all this money that she is pushing in there, and she somehow manages, just like Matthew Rycroft, with a straight face to tell the world what a terrible crisis there is, that it's genocide, that people are dying of starvation, when it's us that's created this problem in the first place.
Reframed, Mike. This is a lady that doesn't have a conscience as normal people. She doesn't feel the need to tell the truth. She's not really concerned about the suffering. She just pumps through the government policy. This is a heavily reframed individual. We're just going to have a couple of alternative subjects, and then we'll come on to that reframing, and we'll start to explain to people how this system works. So a reminder, we're getting very close to the 22nd of April. If you're not booked in to come to the British Constitution Group conference, then please get online and buy tickets. We've been asked time and time again to provide a venue where people can come and they have the opportunity to mix and talk and swap ideas. It's not all set piece talks. So that is what the British Constitution Group has done. This fantastic venue will hold 900 people. Several hundred tickets have been sold already. We know that there's a lot of people coming on the day, but it would be so wonderful if we can get better ideas of numbers by those tickets being sold online. So if you haven't bought a ticket, please get onto the British Constitution group and purchase those tickets. If you've bought a ticket, please spread the word so that we can make this a really fantastic event. Now, while we're about to enjoy a weekend break, hopefully with some nice weather, let's remind ourselves that Melanie Shaw is still in prison. She's held in prison principally by the demand of the British Prime Minister, Theresa May. Theresa May was Home Secretary, made all the decisions that put this very brave child abuse whistleblower in prison. And we know that Melanie Shaw's coming up to 11 and a half months in prison. She has spent much of that time in solitary confinement, even though solitary confinement is regarded by the United Nations as a form of torture. So you asked the question about Yemen and Priti Patel, Mike, and I say, well, we've only got to look at our Prime Minister, Theresa May herself, to see this same callous personality. She really doesn't care what she says. She says she's there to try and counter child abuse. What does she actually do? She puts whistleblowers in prison to silence them because they know too much about the abuse of children by British politicians. And if Melanie's still in prison, let's remember Sergeant Alexander Blackman. He is still in prison, of course, even though a decision has been made to downgrade the charges. And technically, he should be out very quickly, having served 50% of his sentence. But he is still in prison. And we have local Tory MP Johnny Mercer with a holier-than-thou attitude. I wouldn't have done what this man did. Well, Sergeant Alexander Blackman was there doing a job. You were not doing that job in the same circumstances, Mr. Mercer. But again, this callous hypocrisy, Mike. Now, if we give some good news to bring people up a bit, really fantastic response ever since we started pointing people at this incredible video by Mike Veal, the Wiltshire Chief Constable, explaining very carefully how he's been conducting the Heath investigation. And he's had to produce this video because of the immense pressure that's been brought upon him. So if you haven't seen it, please go and have a look on YouTube. Just type in Mike Veal open letter. And once you've seen it, please tweet, Twitter, phone a few friends, and let's get these numbers up. We should be looking at millions of views of this because it's a senior police officer trying to investigate high-level child abuse. And of course, what's happening is he's being pressurised by those callous British MPs and establishment figures who've got a lot to hide. Well, full facts. Thank you very, very much to our viewer that spotted this. What we've got here is Facebook putting tips to spot false news. It says you've got to be sure of the source. You've got to know who provided the news. You've got to have a look at the pictures carefully, Mike, in case those pictures have been doctored in some way. I couldn't imagine the BBC doing that sort of thing or anything like that.
No, they would never represent a Libyan protest using photographs from India.
Nothing like that at all. But something that did worry me a little bit is it says that if you spot any spelling mistakes, then clearly that's fake news. But I look at mainstream media news a lot, of course.
Yeah, that pretty much stuffs the Daily Mail or the Daily Telegraph these
and
days.
The Guardian and the Times and the Telegraph. But according to Google, this is key forensics on fake news. Why are we so interested? Well, their partner in this initiative happens to be Full Fact. So working in partnership with Facebook, but we've been told that, of course, there's no money changing hands. No donations are being made to Full Fact. Full Fact are doing this out of the goodness of their heart. But this was also spotted, and I find this interesting, that Facebook is now going to be running little courses for journalists and giving them advantages to utilize Facebook and Instagram in their daily work. I think this is the start of introducing government-sponsored journalists to work Facebook because too much truth is coming out via the Facebook system.
Yeah.
That's what I think we're looking at. So let's come on to full fact. Here they are. And of course, the red box is the important bit because they're independent, Mike. That's an important thing. We're independent of government, political parties, and the media. And because they've been quoted by politicians on all sides, this is why they're so independent. So we were interested that a quick look on the internet says that they're based at 2 Carlton Gardens, St James, London. And it didn't take us long to find that the Institute for Government is also based at 2 Carlton Gardens. There's a little bit of a coincidence, I'm sure. But when we looked at Full Fact's site, we find that this lady, Jill Rutter, just happens to be part of Full Fact and part of the Institute for Government. But don't worry, because Full Fact is independent of anything to do with government or politics.
But I mean, I'm sure the Institute for Government must be independent from government as well.
Well, one would have thought so, Mike, but it's not, because it's mainly funded by the Sainsbury business empire. But as we're about to see, it's certainly not independent of government. So let's remember, Full Fact said they're independent of government, but effectively they're nearly sharing offices with the Institute for Government. We're pretty confident because a member of the public spoke to them this morning, and we know that the Institute for Government offices are on the ground first and second floor, and Full Fact is on the 3rd floor there. So a nice little nest, but we're particularly interested in this lady, Jill Rutter, because she's got a fascinating background. Here she is in the Institute of Government, and she directs the Institute's work on better policy making and, quote, arm's length government. So this is a government organisation, but they don't want to call it that. It's arm's length.
It's arm's length. So they define arm's length government as being arm's length organisations as being organisations that do the work of government, but which are notionally independent of government. And it all comes down to this idea of independence, Brian. We've been hammering this word for quite a number of months now.
Yeah.
And what's clear is that as soon as an organisation working with or for government that says they're independent of government, it's absolutely clear that they're simply not.
Yes. So I've got a bit of a problem now because we got Full Fact, which says you can rely on it to check the facts, except when it doesn't. It's independent of government, except when it's working alongside the Institute of Government, which is arm's length government. I hope somebody in the audience today can help me out on this, because I'm finding it a little bit tricky to see exactly why Full Fact is independent. But let's have a look at Ms. Rutter. Good place to go, of course, is the old Twitter page. And she's a nice lady. She's into big cuddly teddy bears, Mike.
Good stuff.
She says there she's splitting her time between 2 great organisations, the Institute for Government and Full Fact. So there's no question of the engagement of those 2 organisations. But what has this lady achieved in her past? Well, she was DEFRA, and she helped set up the Centre of Expertise on Influencing Behaviours. She then set up the Cross-Whitehall Group looking at behavioural economics and behavioural change. She worked with David Halpin and Jeff Mulgan, and when David Halpin moved to the Institute of Government, she followed him a little time later. She was then part of the Cabinet Office Strategy Unit, COSU, and it was through this unit that they really started to push in the behavioural change. So DEFRA, an early piece of work, was a framework for pro-environmental behaviours. They're going to change our behaviour to meet their model.
Yes.
Yeah. Then we've got the Department of Health. It moved across. It was working in that as well. They produced this Change for Life document, which is also behavioural change. And then it morphed into the big push, which was Mindspace, influencing behaviour through public policy. So we've got a government woman working straight alongside Full Fact, which is now working with Facebook to control.
So all she needs to do to move between the 2 organisations is to walk up the stairs. That's the first point.
Yeah.
The second point is she cannot claim to be independent of government when she has probably produce a large swathe of government policy for the last 20 years. She's involved with behavioural change and the behavioural insights team. And so she's probably been involved with the mind changing of the top 200 civil servants and the decision to bring common purpose in.
Correct.
At the top levels of government to create that behavioural change. And she's now working for the Institute of Government, which is what? A government policy think tank. And so what is the direction of policy? She is producing the policy and pushing it into government.
And now we can see the connections through Full Fat, where they're beginning to control the news. So if you want to achieve behaviour change, make sure you can control the news and the propaganda. This is unbelievably dangerous. Just pop that one back on if somebody said, well, this is all historical. Well, no, because this is a fairly recent tweet. And what is she doing? She's promoting behavioural change initiatives that are taking place in New South Wales. This is highly significant because, of course, the British government sold its behavioural change expertise to the United States and Australia in the first instance.
Well, in fact, the Behavioural Insights team became one of these arm's length organisations because they turned it into a mutual, where they basically sold it to the people that had created it in the first place. And so that is effectively implementing government policy at arm's length.
Indeed. And just so that there's no mistake about this is the Institute for Government website. And here we can see Mindspace behavioural economics is being promoted. Now, we'd like to say we've given you the information. Isn't it time that hundreds, thousands of people started to challenge Full Fact for its claims, which are simply not credible, that it's independent? And now working with Facebook, this is a very dangerous precedent that we've got the British government getting straight into social media to interfere with the passage of information and truth and facts. It's up to us. Well, we'll end with a smile because this is a picture of Britain's military might. This is all about cyber defence because this is the brick building in which they can train F-35 Lightning pilots. We don't yet have those aircraft. Spring is supposedly when we're getting them, but we haven't quite seen that we've got them and they're coming operational. We haven't got the aircraft carriers, but we have got this brick building with a simulator inside. So I think this is good. We've got cyber aircraft. We've got cyber aircraft carriers in this building. It's just that we haven't got the kit that goes with it.
Good.
Okay. And finally, a note to say that we will be having a break over the bank holiday weekend. So we'll be back at 1 o'clock, Tuesday, the 18th of April. Please join us then. And we'd like to say a very big thank you to all of the people who have supported us, continued to support us. And if you're not a supporter in as much as a subscriber to the UK column, then please subscribe because we can only do what we do with your financial support. Thank you for joining us. We'll be back next week, and that's the 18th of April at 1 o'clock. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.